Hello again. This is Al, and I am bringing you thoughts on Hosea. Thanks for joining me again. We managed to complete 3 chapters so far, and just finished the third chapter in the last episode. Hosea is a relatively short book, so go ahead and take the time to read it through. Use any version you like. Really doesn't matter. The Message, the Living Bible. If you are just reading it just to see what it says, just to hear what it sounds like in your own voice, you can pretty much use anything. If you're interested in something a little deeper than that, then go ahead and get yourself something a little more a little more for that purpose, for studying, something that has a perhaps some maps and some historical information, perhaps even some language information. You got to be careful with Bibles that you choose for commentaries, because sometimes the commentary in certain Bibles comes from just one position only, one theological position, and you may get a skewed look. So I would normally just recommend reading the Bible with prayer in most cases, unless you have an established pattern of study and you know basically what you're doing from experience. But God has given us the Holy Spirit so that we can know what He requires of us. So we're in chapter 4, and that's where we're starting today. So I'd like you to go ahead and pause the video if you need to, and go ahead and read it. It's very quick. It's only 15 or so verses. Now that you've read Hosea 4, let's go ahead and get started. Whatever outlook you have on life, sometimes you may have to admit how bad some things really are. Right now, as I record this video, there are some elements that in the culture right now which are making things a little stressful for people. And so I don't know what's going on in your today, but it might be enough to make you discouraged. So after the Lord described what reconciliation looked like, the Lord then showed Hosea what the judgment was going to look like, what the bad time was going to look like, what the trouble was going to look like for them. So that's basically what chapter 4 of Hosea is. In verse 1, there's a description of Israelite society, and it's described as having no faithfulness, no love, no acknowledgement of God in the land. The land is described as full of murders. Let's take a second here, and we will read 2 Kings 21:16. 2 Kings 21:16 says, "Furthermore, Manasseh killed so many innocent people, he stained Jerusalem with their blood from end to end, in addition to encouraging Judah to sin by doing evil in the sight of the Lord." So that's just one example or expression of the kind of behavior and activity that was going on. So sins, individual, family, regional, and national, were causing the Lord to have a problem with His people. And don't be too quick to make yourself the hero of the story. There are no heroes really in the human story in terms of how short-fallen or how imperfect or how prone to error, sin, obsession, hatred, etc. Human beings can be. And so much so that even, and let it sink in that God is talking to his own people here. He's not talking to the outside people, he's talking to his own people. Cursing, lying, murder, stealing, adultery, resorting to violence and bloodshed. I know that people who may listen to this in my time will hear some of these things and say to themselves, oh, I know just who that is. And like I said, don't be too quick to paint someone else into this picture. We're all in this picture. As a matter of fact, in that was verse 2 where that list of offenses was, but there may even be some consequences in nature for sin if you follow verse 3 of Hosea 4 at all. So priests and religious leaders were no help during this time in Israel because they were just as deep in these sins as everyone else, except that the priesthood tried to keep the veneer of spirituality by continuing to carry out their religious duties. It is not enough. You can be God's people. So, like I said, he was talking to his own people. But it's not just enough just to be, by declaration, God's people, whether you declare yourself or God declares you. Culturally, sometimes we are born into situations like I am Puerto Rican, so I was born into a culture which had its own cultural type of religion, a couple of different religions actually. There is a more natural or indigenous type of religion brought over from Yoruba clansmen in Africa by means of the slave trade, and that had many representations of God. And then there was the religion that was brought by the colonizers. And so for the most part, our religion is the religion of the colonizers. That is the Roman Catholic religion. There are now many Puerto Ricans that are Protestants and charismatics and so on and so forth. So much more of a varied experience now. But sometimes the church is not that helpful in these times, and they participate in the sins. The church in the Lutheran Church in the time of the rise of the Nazis was not that helpful in speaking out against that. The church in many countries has not been helpful in speaking out. Now, sometimes certain portions of the church certainly rise to the challenge, but I am talking about overall, since we are all human and churches and religious institutions are made up of humans, we are just as subject to greed and failure and power mongering, etc., as anyone else. So it's not enough just to culturally be God's people. I must be actually in practice a child of God daily. In order, in private and in public, I must try to be the same person. Now that takes practice, and it takes consistency, and it takes devotion, and so those are some of the things that we have to do. Let's take a second and read Ephesians 4:17 to 19. Ephesians 4:17 through 19 says, "So I say this and insist in the Lord that you no longer live as the Gentiles do in the futility of their thinking. They are darkened in their understanding, being alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to the hardness of their hearts. Because they are callous, they have given themselves over to indecency for the practice of every kind of impurity and greediness." And the warning here is that we not be like them. And you don't warn somebody about something that's not possible. You warn somebody about something that is possible. And so it is possible for the Christian to live as though not a Christian and be a Christian. Um, because the declaration is based on our belief in a person and event, not on our behavior or our ability to perform. Very important distinction there. So let's be very, very careful. But this does not mean that we can behave any kind of way we want. Israel thought that, and so they received some pretty severe consequences. The sin most referred to in this chapter is prostitution, which fits with the overall message of the faithfulness of God in comparison to the unfaithfulness of Israel. Think back to Hosea versus Homer. Okay, Hosea, very faithful, so faithful that he goes to buy his wife out of the prostitution market. Gomer, so unfaithful that she sells herself, literally sells herself, so that she can continue in that behavior. It's just an amazing, amazing story. I find myself in there so much. I don't always listen to or seek the Lord when I need answers or wisdom and insight in a situation. I am prone to consult my favorite news channel, the one that confirms my bias, my favorite author or theological system, my friend that usually agrees with me, and a family member who, feeds my anger. God may be the last one that I consult, if I ever even consult him. This is the gist of verse 12. We have many idols. Idols, if you're a fundamentalist, idols are always something outside of yourself, right? And something that has already been listed before, they are, generally speaking, equated with sins. So, gambling and, some very obvious things that cause people problems, and then you try to objectify some of these things, like women, for instance. So somehow it's not your fault, it's the woman's fault for dressing a certain way or for being a certain way. It's so many things that we externalize when actually the problem is in us. It is in us. And so we can't always point our finger outside and say that's the problem. It is our problem. And we need help. We really need help. I cannot love the Lord my God with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength without God's help. I cannot love my neighbor without help. I cannot keep or fulfill the moral requirements of the Christian lifestyle without help. I am powerless. I need to seek God who has power and wisdom for all aspects of life and who alone can restore me to sanity. No party, position, or system, philosophical or theological, can restore me to sanity. Only God can. And I speak this as a person in recovery and as a Christian. It would behoove the Christian to stop leaning on so many idols, whether that idol be your country or whether that idol be some symbol that is equated to your country or where you're from, or that idol is an institution or a theological system. It is time now to turn back to God, the simplicity of a God who loves us and who will do anything to demonstrate his loyal love to us, including sacrificing his own son. That's all the time I have for today. Thank you for joining us again. Really appreciate you. Take care. Bye bye.